Whiteboard Guy, Bryn Tillman, LinkedIn and AI Nerd, Chris Bowen, Sales Nerd. These are our titles today. And I guess that makes me also a sales nerd. So we're here today. We're talking, if you've joined us on LinkedIn Live, thanks for joining us. If you have anything that you want to add, please post to us. We're going to do 4 podcasts today while you're sitting here with us. And we're going to be talking about why sales, marketing, and customer success seem to be all doing their own thing. So we're going to dive right into that first podcast. Let me straighten myself out here before we go live. There we go. Oh, and Renee just joined. All right. You ready, Renee? Hello and welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm your host, Liz Hyman, and I am here with your Sales SOS podcast crew. Mike Simmons, our whiteboard guy, Bryn Tillman, our LinkedIn and AI nerd, Chris Bowen, our sales nerd, which makes Renee our marketing nerd, and me, I'm a sales strategist or sales nerd very often. We're here today and we understand as a leader of a company, you have a lot of things that you need to make work together to make the company function. And one of the things we find is silos, right? These silos are everywhere. And one of the most frustrating things that I think can happen is when your sales, your marketing, and your customer success are siloed. And those teams are not working together. They're not bringing you the revenue that you need. And there's friction, not the good kind of friction that brings change or any of that stuff, but the bad kind of friction that prevents good things from happening. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the age-old question is, why isn't sales following up on marketing leads? Like my friend Chris Beal says that 90% of leads end up on the cutting room floor, meaning that marketing brings them over and sales doesn't do anything with them. So what's happening? Why is there this bitter divide?
I can, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as a marketer in the room, I think I'll speak up on this one a little bit because I have a unique perspective, particularly since I cross over to sales. I'd say the overall thesis of it, like where it starts on all these topics that we're talking about today for these 4 episodes, is simply that the teams don't drift apart intentionally. They drift apart because the customer is living a long journey on a longer horizon, and each team is only accountable for their part of it, and they don't understand the other parts often. So I'll start with that thesis essentially, but say that I'll give an example of where, Liz, you've teed it up perfectly with the 90% of leads go on the cutting room floor. Those leads were really hard won. It is not easy to get leads in business right now. People don't want to volunteer information until they're fully ready. So both sides are right, but their horizon is off, right? And I'll give an example. In almost every discovery call I do, I ask a question and I'm like, how long is your sales cycle? Invariably, in B2B, particularly mid-market, the answer will be, I bet you all can guess it, 60 to 90 days, right? And sometimes we do faster, sometimes it takes longer, but our average, right? And I've gotten to the point now where I will say this in the discovery call without even looking, because I find it every single time. I will say, I will bet you that if I go into your CRM and look at the contacts inside accounts that have recently closed, that you have contacts that have been in your CRM for 18 to 24 months. You just didn't start selling to them until 60 to 90 days ago. That means that you had about a year and a half where someone was sitting in your system and not engaging with that lead. You can do drip campaigns, you can do a lot of things, but there was likely a huge gap in between when they've entered your system and when someone is actively engaging with them to help pull them through the journey. So I'll just start our thesis off with that today.
I think this idea that are interacting with us long before we know they are is really important. In fact, I have a new client and I keep saying that to them, like, how long has it been? How long have they really been there? So this idea that there's a buyer journey and there's a sales journey, and that sales journey may start way after that buyer journey starts. Bryn, what have you got?
Well, so I love what Renee said. My head goes to the leads that are coming in the door, that are coming in the door. I'm so old, in the door, in the computer thing where the leads come in, right? So, but one of the things when I'm working with a client and we look at the type of content that's creating the leads, often is not the type of content that will attract the lead at the right time when the salesperson wants to have a conversation. So something that I learned actually from David Newman, Do It Marketing and Do It Sales guy, often talks about we have to market to the buyers at the step before they ever even know they need us. When we can get them early, we can really help to form their journey, right? We can become the right person at the right time. So if they're further along their journey, let's say by the time they become a lead, because we're talking about products or the content, we probably have competition. There's probably another vendor who has influenced their buying decisions, and we're late in the game. So, but if a salesperson reaches out, or if it's less likely to become a good lead right now. Even though marketing will say that's a hot lead, they're shopping now. In some ways, it's late in that process. So I like the idea of aligning the content that creates the lead with the conversation that salesperson is going to have early on in the journey. That makes sense.
Yes, 100%, Bryn. You just took what I said further. And it's exactly why I can say that lead that you think you've only sold to for 60, 90 days, well, I know I can say with confidence, you have some sitting in there that have been there 18 to 24 months, because the earlier you capture them in that journey, the less likely they are to go find your competitors. Right. So that's why I know I can find them in close one. Right.
Yes. Ooh, that was fun.
So I think there's something really important here, though, that we need to address, and that is that we are always trying to shorten the sales cycle, right? As leaders, we want a shorter sales cycle. And what you just said, Bryn, was if we get out ahead of it, we may have a better chance of closing it. But I also want to tell you that lengthens your sales cycle. Is that a bad thing? No.
Right.
Because they're not ready to buy, but just because they don't have a timeline and a budget yet doesn't mean they're not going to buy from you. It just means they're not going to buy from you in 30, 60, 90 days. And so we have to decide where we want to put our resources and how we want to address that.
But I really want to say, though, this is the flywheel effect, right? Like once you've got it going, now you'll have, may feel like a longer sales cycle, but your close ratio is going to go up significantly. And it's going to feel like a lot in the beginning, but once you've got that machine going, you've got active, 30-day out, 68-day out, 90-day out contracts. So it just might feel a little bit longer now, but your ratio of lead in to lead close, I believe, will go up significantly because we have the opportunity to educate them during their decision process, right? We can go back to, the Challenger sale, whatever this.
Go back to my dad, right? This is what my dad's been saying for how many, 60 years or something now. But yeah, right?
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know what your dad's statistic is. I think Challenger says 60, or your customers, 68% of the buying decision is made before the salesperson enters. There's a challenge here because how are they making that decision? They're making that off of resources that marketing has put out. right? They're making that, they're in that journey in the marketing funnel. So when it gets to the salesperson, that 68% was educated, they were being educated by marketing material.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure that that is at the right time, at the right search. So by the time they get to our salesperson, we're the ones who gave them the best content that helped them to see the path that leads to us as the best decision.
Chris, Mike, what have you got? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, I think all that is accurate. I think you have to be able to understand where that customer is at that given point, right? If you're gonna try to break it down into the sales cycle, know when they make that transition from being sort of in the marketing, educational, building their internal case, whatever you have, to when it moves over into a salesperson and they need that additional assistance that seller is going to be able to provide. I think if you don't understand where they're at, then you're going to have a hard time, I think, meeting them in an appropriate place. And that's where you're going to get really misaligned on the numbers. So
that's why the salespeople aren't following up, is what you're saying.
I think salespeople don't follow up for many reasons. They'll say the leads are crap. I think a lot of it is there's a disconnect between marketing, sellers not being aware of what's being marketed, when, and how. So when they get a lead, they're like, oh, I called this lead and it was crap. Okay, well, when did it originally go out? As an example, in my company, I got a lead that I was told was a hot lead. It was 8 months old. Because a seller had left. This was something that was still sitting in marketing as an MQL, and nobody had ever followed up on it. Now, I will tell you, I'm not super thrilled to be the person reaching out saying, hey, 8 months ago, of course, I'm not going to frame it that way. You reached out, or you attended an event, or you did whatever it was, and now I'm following up. I think that makes our company look somewhat incompetent. And that's not a place you want to be. So then you have relationship stuff to build up after that point. I think the same thing happens in the other half of the journey, which is from sales to customer success. Are we pulling in the CS people early enough into the process to where it's not this abrupt change of, oh, hey, now that you've signed that contract, I'm passing you off and I'm not going to deal with you? Because I think that's a really, really bad customer experience as well. So, I mean, I think there's communication that has to happen between all three parts throughout that journey, and it has to be at the appropriate parts and being able to educate. I mean, I know that I will frequently say dumb sales guy, but most of the sellers I know aren't dumb. But telling them where they are and where it's appropriate for them to follow up. The second you give them something to point at, they're going to go, but they're going to be aggressive. And if it ends up being it was the inappropriate time, then that's when you're going to hear, oh, those leads are crap.
You know, Chris, you pointed out a huge thing. I don't think many marketers understand the sales side deeply, right? Intimately. And not many salespeople understand the marketing side. There's I can get into this when we go through.
They're the two jobs in your business that everybody else thinks they can do better than the professionals that are doing it.
Well, you said that, not me, but I will say, I mean, in one of our further episodes, I'll go into this a little bit more detail, but there's a lot of what one team considers signal and one team considers noise. And they aren't educated on the literacy of why one is signal and one is noise to the other side. And when you bridge that translation gap, amazing things start happening.
No doubt.
Hey, Mike, what have you got? Wait.
Yeah, so I think, and Chris kind of hit on parts of this. It's what's the question, or the question that we're trying to answer, or the problem that we're trying to solve for? Is it that the response time between when a lead is identified as a whatever it is and when the person inside the organization engages with them is not appropriate? Is that what we're trying to solve for? Or are we actually trying to solve for when internally versus when externally, from the customer perspective, when is the right time? And so much of this gets lost in clarity of definition and alignment on what those definitions are to get to the point that Renee is highlighting, which is the signal and noise piece. We get ourselves into situations where we're measuring KPIs or key performance indicators, and we've talked about this before, that aren't connected to each other. So we may have our own set of KPIs that are that don't demonstrate a conversion handoff, or we look at some KPIs as leading indicators and we look at some KPIs as lagging indicators. And again, we've gone into much more detail on that, but I think the key that I would suggest that everybody focus on, if this is something you're struggling inside your organization, is what is the specific thing that you're trying to solve for? Is it a timing thing? Is it a behavior thing? Is it a confusion thing? Because if it's a behavior thing, you're not going to solve for it with with timing. You're gonna solve for it with capability, knowledge, and awareness. You're gonna solve for it with opportunity, operating environment, process. You're going to solve for it with motivation, and it's going to fall into one of those three areas from a COM-B perspective when we talk about behavior change. But if it's that people just don't even see it, there's no visibility into it, and they don't even know that they're sitting out there, like the 8-month one, then I don't care what your behavior is, there's no way that someone is going to be able to solve for it. So I think the way I would shorten that back up, and it went very long on it, it's make sure you are very clear about the problem you're trying to solve for. Don't just go in and start solving for a bunch of stuff just because someone said, hey, our leads aren't getting contacted soon enough, or we need to do better on this thing, or whatever the heck it is.
Okay, so let me rephrase that. Let me state it again and make sure I've got it right. We just came up with a bunch of things. One is tools. If the salesperson, whatever tool you're using, does not get the lead in front of the salesperson in time, they're not going to follow up on it, right? So one of the issues is, how are we making sure that the salesperson gets it? The second thing is timing, right? If it's too early, too late, or it's been sitting around too long, or any of those things, the salesperson isn't going to want to follow up on it. And the third was measurement, which we're going to talk about later. If we're not being, if the salesperson isn't being compensated, if they feel that following up on that lead is wasting their time and they're not going to end up being compensated on it, they're not going to do it, right? Salespeople are really motivated by compensation. They may be motivated by other things as well, but if they're not getting paid, it doesn't make sense for them to do it. That's kind of what I heard. Did I miss anything in there?
No, I think that's a good summary. It's these are complex challenges to solve for, and we create more complexity by trying to do them 80 different ways.
So then let me flip the question for a second. How do we get salespeople to follow up on leads? What do we need to do differently? If those are the problems, what do we need to do differently?
So the first thing I think we have to do is have a roundtable discussion so that the salespeople can honestly say what it is that would motivate them, what kind of leads do they feel like they need, and there just needs to be open communication, I think, in the beginning, right? Like we also have to take down our defenses, because marketing is going to be upset that sales is dropping the leads, and sales is upset that marketing's not bringing in the right leads. And when ego gets in the way, the whole thing will fall apart. So we have to be okay with what we hear, because these are they're perspectives, right? And they're what we need. And I think, and I'm seeing more of this actually, where marketing and sales is less siloed, that there is overflow. In fact, I actually started working with a client whose marketing is now bonused or commissioned alongside of the salespeople. And I thought that was a really interesting model, because now they have to work together to make their nut, right? Like, so I think the bottom line of what I'm saying is we've got to take down those walls, take down the silos, really talk to each other, take your ego out of it, and recognize what we're looking to do is help more people with our solution, right? And we're going to do that as a team. And we can't take it personally if what we're doing is not working well. We have to go through the simplest things I learned so early in my career is, what do we need to stop doing? What do we need to start doing? And what do we need to continue doing? And we've got to do that as a team, not siloed.
Liz, I would add, I think that's 100% where it has to start, Bren. Like, you've got to open up the dialogue and make it a safe space to talk together and really listen to what the challenges are and what other people think the opportunities are. So 100% start there. But I will also say this, and both sides are going to get mad at me for this, but I got to speak the truth on this one. Most marketers are not marketing far enough. Most salespeople are not picking up early enough. And most CS people are not getting to where they need before it gets to them. So, but beyond the dialogue, right? We need to understand that marketing represents the brand, and the brand experience does not stop at when sales picks it up, right? So if marketers are going further with marketing and not stopping at lead generation, because that is a very small piece of marketing, then they will inherently understand the rest of the buyer journey, the rest of the customer journey, and they will understand what the other teams are doing more. If sales starts lightly talking to people sooner instead of throwing out babies with bathwater, then they will start forming relationships sooner, and they will start understanding the marketing side enough to just kind of connect and say, I'm here for when you want more, right? The same thing you can do if you met somebody at a business networking event, right? You're going to talk a little bit about what you do. You're not going to go in for this hard pitch right there in the room. It's kind of the same thing. We're getting some people in the room with you. You know, it's good to introduce yourself, get a little, see how you can help, make sure they know your name when they do want to talk to somebody, right? Not wait, maybe you get them because they don't get assigned to someone else later. There are selfish interests in that, right? So if we start marketing further along, because too many people are stopping at lead gen, and we start thinking about, Liz, you were brilliant in saying this, stop pushing for the sales cycle to be shorter and instead open up our perspective to what the buyer is really doing and letting sales in that a little earlier and not this false metric of how fast did you do it, right? Then I think that solves a lot. And Chris, I think you said perfectly when you said like CS doesn't get involved soon enough. Like they've got to restart everything. And that's the number one frustration is somebody says, oh, I've explained this to everybody before I bought the product. Why am I starting over at step one or whatever? So they absolutely need to be moved up. And there's a crossover with marketing and CS a lot too that doesn't happen, right? In a lot of places. And I will always call it the buyer journey the whole time because they never stop buying. They gotta make an active decision to keep buying from you, and you're hoping that you're convincing them to buy more.
So that takes us into our next topic today, which is really who owns what stage of the buyer journey. And before we do that, let's just are there any last thoughts about how do you get salespeople to follow up on the leads in a timely manner? Is there anything about that we missed that CEOs who are listening are like, that's the piece we're missing here?
Don't make it a salesperson thing. I mean, like if the reason that the salesperson is not following up on the leads is because they are so busy developing their existing pipeline that they don't have time to engage with new potential opportunity to create pipeline, then add another layer in there. And this is where marketing, sometimes organizations will have a business development rep or a sales development rep, SDR or BDR, as part of the marketing function. Other organizations will make it part of the sales function. That ends up being the thing of the person, the human in the loop that can bridge the gap between what happens from a marketing perspective and what happens from a sales perspective. Now, they're not the one who's creating the pipeline. That's the responsibility of the person who owns that specific number. So you can put another human in the loop to help take care of this thing if this is a widespread problem. If it's an individual problem, then take care of it at an individual level and figure out what's happening on that side. 'Cause typically, in the context of start, stop, continue, there's certain things that are working, there are certain things that are not working, and there are certain places that they're stuck. But it's not always a point at people in the room and say, you need to respond faster because our SLA is 24 hours from the point that the lead is assigned to you, or you need to get us better leads because your leads, whatever. Like all of this you need to stuff gets in the way of the success of the customer. And maybe the answer, depending on your organization, especially if you have people who are leaking through this, is to put another body on it and have that body engage.
100%, Mike. And I would say there are also like interactive tools and things that you can add to that, right? Like choose your own adventure with some support of a person available, right?
So I want to add one more piece to this, which is we often forget, and this is what Mike was saying, is there are only so many hours in a day. And a salesperson can physically do so much work. So we want to be really thoughtful about the work that our salespeople are doing and making sure that they can do the work that needs to be done to close the deals that they need to close. And then they're inundated with things that are not helping them hit the quotas that you want them to quit. So important piece. And I love this idea. I keep wanting to call them MDRs, marketing development reps. We have so many terms. Okay, let's wrap up this segment and let's talk about the whole buyer journey. Let's go into our next episode. You guys ready for that? Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. What I'm now calling the CEO Sales SOS podcast. Okay, let's jump into our next one. Welcome to the CEO Sales SOS podcast. This is Liz Hyman. I'm your host, and I am here with Chris Bowen. And let me get the whole team out. There we go. I'm here with Chris Bowen, sales nerd. Renee Bigelow, marketing nerd. We're doing nerd today. Mike Simmons, who's our whiteboard guy, maybe our whiteboard nerd. And Brent Hellman, LinkedIn and AI nerd. And today we're talking about like what happens when sales and marketing and CS are not aligned. They're not working together. There's friction. It's difficult to keep the ball rolling because there's so much friction between the teams. And I think the next way to sort of talk about this is to think again about the buyer journey. When we're talking about sales, that buyer journey is so important. And so often we figure out what we are going to do as a company before we think about how our buyers want to buy. So let's think about that entire buyer journey or sales process or marketing process, whatever you want to call it. But let's think about that whole journey and who owns what part. And I think more importantly, where do they overlap? Like, where is the overlap on these things? And I think let's start with the marketing to sales thing. We just talked about this a little bit in our last episode, but let's dive into where does it go from one to the other and where is the overlap there? And then let's talk about the CS side in just a minute. Does somebody want to start?
I'll start us off because I have a great anecdote that someone shared with me years ago. I used to describe this whole thing as like a relay race, right? And you have the baton and you're handing off. But I discovered in that analogy and through, hard lessons learned in practice, right? That handoffs are actually where leaks happen. And so I changed the analogy, and the one that someone provided to me, because I wasn't a big bike race person, was that bike racers, they don't have a handoff. They put the expertise in the point where, someone who's really good at climbs takes the climb. Someone who's really good at going really fast in the flats, right? Like they take that part and they trade off based on who owns what motion, essentially. So I think it's really important to kind of back up and say, if we say who owns what stage, we almost create the problem a little bit because ownership by stage means handoff means trust leaks, right? It's just inevitable. No matter how talented and how well-intentioned everybody is, nobody owns the customer because everybody owns the customer. So the customer owns the journey. We own what our contribution is to the motion. Does that make sense? So whatever our contribution and strength is, and where we are, where the lanes we are covering, right? We own that contribution. And I think that helps people think less siloed.
So I'd like to ask a question versus, because you got my gears going. So if there's not a handoff, I hear what you're saying. I think the question is that first person, let's even call it an SDR in the beginning, who books the call, and now the AE takes the call, and it goes now into customer service. Are all of them still all touch points in that customer journey? Or because from my experience, I'm not saying, you go SDR, the SDR never talks to that client again. And the AE may check in mostly for referrals into other clients and to make sure everything's going okay. But now the customer service person is the one who really builds the deepest relationship. Am I missing?
So I think this goes back to like an SLA, right? Like what we have to define the motions so that we understand our lanes. But the understanding that I don't own this customer at this point, I own the motion, not the customer, right? And the customer owns the whole journey. I think just kind of flips the script a little bit. And it's, so the SLA is what motions do I own? Where am I accountable, right? And it's that idea of, here's an easy example. I used to, if we got someone all the way to sales qualified lead, I stopped marketing, right? Because I didn't want to step on the salesperson's toes, and I didn't want to be sending an email at the same time they're sending an email and so forth. But that's another harsh change for somebody who could be in a process for 3 months, right? They're no longer getting the same kind of communication that they got that helped educate them. It also puts a lot of load bearing on that salesperson. So what I changed it to is, once someone enters into a sales process, then we would have certain days that we would make it more known. Like, these are days that marketing would send something so they can work around it. The salesperson can choose whether or not 2 emails would go on that day, right? If they're in the middle of a cadence, it would still go. If they don't want to overload, they could back off, but they knew exactly what to expect. And they knew what the messages would be. They moved into sales enablement type messaging, right? So it was a shift, and we still own that motion, but it wasn't like sales now own the customer. We had to back off.
I love that. I haven't thought of it that way, and I think that's brilliant.
This whole idea of ownership, I think, is creates more tension inside business than it's worth. And what I mean there is, we get into this whole piece around, hey, I own this account, or I own this relationship, or I own whatever. No, the owner of the relationship is the business. It's the business. The service provider has the relationship with the organization that requires service or is making the transaction. I think we've also kind of gone back and forth between this definition of journey. Are we talking about buyer journey, or are we talking about customer journey? And a lot of times we'll use them interchangeably. I like customer journey because in most of the engagements that I'm a part of, there are multiple people involved in it. It's not just the buyer. It's the person who's responsible for implementing it. And it's the person who's responsible, who ultimately uses it. And there are different decision makers. There are different end users, are different levels of complexity in there. So it could be a buyer, if that's the person you're always dealing with, or it could be the customer on the whole. And the next thing that I think we make a mistake with when we talk about it in that context is we think about it relative to our perspective of what their journey is. And the way that I like to phrase it and organize it, and this gets into the Dare to Grow model, which is demand acquisition, retention through expansion. Expanding accounts tend to retain or tend to stay and continue to work with you. If you look at the customer journey, it's kind of like the game of life. They're constantly picking up new things, and they don't ever really lose those things. It may not be linear unless you spread it out. They meander throughout this thing, and that customer stays a customer from the point that they originally are aware of you until the point that they've decided to end of life at some point in time, or they win their game or whatever. But that's the customer journey aspect of it, game of life. The sales process that we use for forecasting is a bit more like chutes and ladders. You can advance really quick and go up a ladder because somebody wants a proposal, and then you slide backward because you run into procurement or somebody new gets added into it. And these are looping processes where if you go in a certain order, then you expect to get to a certain result, but sometimes you have to go backward a couple of times. And then the third one is the rep approach, like how the rep goes through and does their work. And too often we try to I see people call these things the same thing. So we're talking about sales process, or we're talking about whatever the thing is. And when they don't distinguish between the job to be done of each of those things that you're designing for, then they get confused and they try to solve for it in one way that doesn't necessarily make sense. They try to throw more people at it or more content at it. And when Renee talks about marketing, I always think one to many. It's broad communication going out to a bunch of people. They may be tailored for the individual, but it's one-to-many communication. When I'm communicating with people, that's one-to-one. I'm communicating directly to the individual, and it could be multiple roles inside an organization. People talk about multi-threading, but I don't think they think that more as multiple people that they're talking to, but there are multiple roles that you might be engaging with and then trying to pull those together. And that happens at an individual level. It's not scalable, but we keep trying to tell people that they can scale that. Those are individual one-on-one conversations. So anyway, that's just some perspective. Are we playing game of life? Are we playing chutes and ladders? Are we playing Monopoly, which is the sales rep approach? And who are the characters that are involved in that, in the play that's happening, and how are we communicating throughout?
So, Mike, it's really interesting because in the Miller-Heiman vernacular, we talk about buying influences, right? These are all of the people who influence the buyer decision or the buying decision, as opposed to buyer, which some people interpret a buyer as like a purchasing person, a buyer as opposed to somebody who's involved in the buying process. And I think we haven't done a great job more recently in finding the right vocabulary for that. Chris, did you want to add something?
I think the biggest thing is just the communication between the various teams. If you go back to what Renee had said earlier about marketing, owning the brand message, that brand message doesn't stop once they become a lead. So if they're going to still engage with your brand, unless you're selling one-off products where they buy once and they're never going to buy again, then you have to keep them engaged with the brand. But you also want to make sure that seller understands, hey, what messages are going to be delivered to my client? Who are they going to? Because maybe it's going to a completely different area than what I have traditionally sold into. And I want to be able to leverage that. But I need to be aware when these things are happening because they have a relatively quick burn. So I want to make sure that I'm following up appropriately with those right people at that right time, because I think that's going to be your best bet at whatever you want to term it, conversion or something along those lines.
So let's go. So we've talked a lot about the front end, right? The beginning of the customer journey, the buyer journey, the beginning of the process when a customer engages with us before they make their first buying decision, right? And so now they've made that first buying decision, and now we're bringing in customer success. And Chris's argument is customer success should come in way earlier than at that handoff that Renee talked about, which is where balls get dropped, right? I'm handing over a whole pile of balls, not one ball, not one baton, but a whole bunch of things and a whole bunch of information. And now the customer success team is taking that over. I want to talk about that, but I also want to go back to an idea that Renee implied a little while ago, which is, where does marketing fall off? And if we have a repeat buyer or a company has multiple divisions, they could buy more products, they could buy the same product in different divisions. Marketing becomes a really important part of opening more doors inside an existing company, right? So that's not just customer success, and it's not just the salesperson. And depending upon how your company divides it up, there's a lot of opportunity for marketing to make a big impact here. But let's go back. Let me back up to, when does customer success get involved, and how do you get these teams then working together around the client in a way that doesn't do what Mike said, which is everybody trying to decide who owns the client, but actually supporting that customer or client in a successful purchase?
So one way I've seen this done, and it's done differently in different organizations, largely due to scale too, right? So I understand that caveat, but in pipeline review, you can have a team in pipeline review that includes a marketer, a BDR, your salesperson, and your customer success team that will inherit the account, so that you are understanding where it is and able to help translate over what you understand about it, what signal you know from your motion out of the noise into that whole team, right? And then everybody is kind of up to speed as it moves along. And then after it's sold, it moves into a version of what you want to call pipeline review for CS, onboarding pipeline, or whatever term you want to use around that, so that whole team kind of stays involved for that critical period of time. Maybe it's the 60 days before close, depending on your time, your customer life cycle and your sales cycle. Maybe it's the 60 days before close and the 60 days into onboarding, or the 30 days into onboarding, or whatever. And importantly, that they are part of a QBR. So as the QBRs come up for that account, that same team that kind of remembers all that history is in the room at least once a quarter for a quick conversation. And that's when you get ideas back from marketing. Oh, these opportunities have started to emerge. We have these assets we can help deploy. How do we want to develop a campaign specifically for that account, right? It might be many people within that account, all these other divisions or whatever. Or you have a BDR that says, oh, wait, this came up in the first conversation that they were tight with it, right? And then sales is like, well, this was what we got in discovery. And now you have a whole feedback loop, a whole flywheel that gets working again, but it's supported by that structure of all the people who are involved in it to begin with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I am the biggest proponent of account management, right? If we just expect accounts to continue the way they are, or to grow themselves, or to tell us when they need something, we are leaving a lot of money on the table. So this idea that customer success takes over, but nobody takes an active selling role in the company anymore can be a huge mistake, right? Oh, well, they're happy with us. We don't want to upset them with a salesperson. Well, if you're worried about upsetting them with a salesperson, you have the wrong salesperson, right? Talking to them, first of all. But if you want to maintain and grow these accounts, there's a lot of work that goes into getting the teams working around that. Mike, did you have something?
I think a portion of that, Liz, when you talk about we don't want to upset them by putting in a salesperson, I think that just goes into the negative perception of salespeople in a lot of places, right? Like, oh, they don't see the work that goes into it. So then they automatically have this misperception, in my view, of what that seller is going to do. I think a lot of it comes down to, where's the communication happening? How are you making sure that, hey, we understand what we're currently doing in this account? I've had the conversation with many people. If we believe that we are the best provider for whatever service it is for this particular customer, then it is incumbent upon us to make sure that they understand what we can deliver for them. The number of times that I've gone into accounts that I've inherited where they didn't understand half of what we could deliver, right? Or even a third sometimes. Like, they have a very limited view because of what you do for them today. That's not everything that you may be able to deliver to them. And that's a combination of all three of those organizations working together. The people that are in customer success.
What just happened? I think Chris is frozen.
I know, right?
Problems.
Chris, you were just in your most brilliant moment and you froze.
Oh,
I was like all being done, Chris.
Sorry. So where did it cut off on me?
You froze right as you said those three organizations coming together.
So if the three organizations come together, so you have a full view of what your customer needs. The customer success people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Marketing understands what we're going to be able to deliver overall, and that seller is helping to understand the pain within that account and the needs that that particular customer has or will have in the future, and being able to tie all those things together when you get to those interactions. I mean, I think it's just really important for all those functions to be really, really tightly connected. And QBRs are a great place, but when you're doing that QBR, how are you preparing for it to make sure that you're delivering the right messages? Because I've also walked into QBRs where they became a firing squad, and that's never fun, but sometimes that's what you got to deal with.
I like the idea of thinking of the salesperson as the quarterback, right? Or if it's not the salesperson, it's the account leader or the account manager as the quarterback, managing the relationships that are happening, right? If nobody's managing it, it's kind of like medical care, right? If you're going to see a whole bunch of specialists and nobody's managing your care, you got a problem. And I think the same is true in sales. If we get this person, the engineer and the customer success, and everybody's talking to the customer, but there's nobody quarterbacking, there's nobody making sure that the message is aligned, that all of the right buyers are included, it becomes messy. And I want to talk about that a little bit more in our next segment. So do we have anything before we jump into our next episode, anything more about how you get sales and marketing, customer success to work together and get along and get rid of the friction? Very last thoughts.
So Liz, I alluded to this in our last episode. I'll share it here because it's a practical takeaway. One of the highest value things I do for clients, I think, goes highly unrecognized by leaders because it's a little bit in the weeds, but it is that separation of signal from noise. And it's literally taking a prospect, sitting down with generally a salesperson and a customer success person, taking an actual prospect and walking through all the data that we have and what we can show about that prospect and why they're moved into a lead, all of that, and literally using that data to tell the narrative in the way that a marketer sees it. Again, it's the signal we see as a marketer that doesn't always translate, right? I can't tell you how many times I have seen, I'm not going to lie, I always start with the best salespeople, right? Like they're going to champion it because if they're really good, they know to just separate out corporate bureaucracy from what really works. And if they say it really works, the other people come along, right? So I start with the best salespeople, and it is so much fun to watch something that they see as just distraction, essentially, and show them, explain the narrative to them, where they start seeing, like the Matrix, right? Where they start seeing what all this stuff that's in this account activity shows, or the contact activity, what that means and how they can use it. And it like a good one almost never comes back to me. They're like, wow, I've seen it, the light bulb, right? And then the same for CS, because it's going to come to them and those same signals are still latent inside that account, right? And there's a lot of future buying signal still in those same latent data points that we got early on, because they made one decision, they didn't make all the decisions. So that one is like a really practical thing that you can do. And it leads to that idea of that pipeline review that includes all the other people, that, that quarterly business review. But it's just such high impact. And it's not like just making people go to a meeting and agree to be nice, right? It's like really translating to each other.
Thanks, Renee. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the CEO Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, and in our next episode, we are going to talk about the finger pointing that happens and what we need to do about that. So join us there. Thanks for joining us here. Okay. Welcome to the CEO Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, your host, and I am here with your Sales SOS podcast crew: Chris Bowen, sales nerd; Mike Simmons, whiteboard guy; Renee Bigelow, marketing nerd; and Bryn Tillman, LinkedIn and AI nerd. But I want to talk a little bit more about this team for just a second. You know, Chris is a VP of sales and is running a sales team every day. So when he's talking about this, he's talking about the most intimate moments of his workday. Like, these are the things that he is coping with, dealing with, trying to fix every day. And Mike is an amazing sales consultant who goes into teams and really understands, where is leadership breaking down? How are you going to change the way this team works together to get the kind of results that you need? How are you going to create the vision that this team is going to follow? We joke about him being a whiteboard guy because he uses the whiteboard to explain in a way that very few people do. But Mike is an amazing consultant, and Renee is a marketing chief marketing officer, fractional chief marketing officer. But what Renee does is goes in and really looks at she talks about this flywheel, right? Where are we getting in, and how are we creating momentum and keeping it going and maintaining all of the pieces that bring sales and marketing together and get repeat business? And she does it in a way I've never seen anyone else do. She really marries these two together. And Bryn is probably the most brilliant tactician I've met when it comes to sales, and her understanding of how to use AI and LinkedIn to really make those tactics doable it's worth watching, right? It's worth learning. So, I don't think I give this team enough credit for who they are and what they do and what they know. We are talking about why it happens in sales organizations that sales and marketing and customer service start pointing fingers at each other. I keep talking about this friction in the last couple of episodes, but there's a lot of finger pointing that goes on. And there's this inevitable thing that happens where sales has sold something. They think it's brilliant. They think they did all the work. They got all the information that's needed. They've sold this amazing, huge thing. And customer success comes in and they're confused. They don't understand. The operations team is trying to operationalize it. They're missing pieces. It didn't work. It's not as profitable as they thought they were going to be. And suddenly there's all these fingers pointing. And, sales thinks they've done a great job. Customer success thinks they've done a great job. Operations thinks they've done everything they can. And you have this, really ugly situation. How does this happen? How do we stop it? Bryn, I'm going to let you start.
Yeah. And I'm not going to have a lot to say on this because I know people are going to go deep into SOPs and making sure that, all those processes are in place. But I'm going to talk about the mindset first for a moment. The challenge often that I see is that each individual would rather be right than happy. Meaning they just stick their heels in the sand and they're like, this is the way it has to be done because this is the right way. And again, that's like this ego thing, right? It's about, I don't want to be wrong. And the moment I don't want to be wrong, I'm making someone else wrong. The moment I need to be right is when I'm making other people wrong. So I'm sure there's going to be lots of tactical ways to make sure that everybody is in flow, right? That it's all working synchronized with synchronicity. Is that a word? Right. But, but the key, I believe, is you have to be more attached to getting it right than being right. So.
I agree. How do we prevent these debacles, these melees that happen in our company?
I agree 100%, Bryn. And I think, that's kind of like you said in the very beginning, like just getting everybody to talk is so getting everybody to agree on right, not right, but, that 100% the great start. Liz, I'll kind of tie it to, and Bryn touched on this earlier about salespeople and commissions, and that they're aligned often because that is how they're paid, right? Like, it's not just because salespeople are inherently more money motivated. I find they're just more confident that they can do what they need to do in order, and therefore willing to take on commission versus salary, right? I find it's more about confidence level than it is about, values. So that leans into incentives and KPIs, and a lot of KPIs are simply, I think, leading to this problem of what's right, Liz? Because Bryn, because we are choosing a scoreboard, and the team is doing what the scoreboard says, but we're choosing a scoreboard that is using the data we have versus the state we're trying to be. And that sets up some perverse incentives.
So let's hold off on this for a moment, Renee, because I want to dig into this in the next episode.
Oh, okay.
Let's really dig into the KPIs and measures and how we do that in the next segment. Let's talk, because that's no question a really big part of this. But let's talk about, where does it go wrong? How is it that sales thinks they could have this great sale, and it ends up being an operational nightmare? What happens? How do we prevent that? How do we get these teams, the sales team, the customer success team, and the operations team or the engineering team, working together to prevent these? Mike, I'm putting you on the spot. Oh, wait, maybe I'm putting Chris on the spot. Hang on.
Okay.
Putting Chris on the spot here. Then Mike.
Luckily, I don't have that problem. Mainly because our delivery organization is, you can't hear me? Okay. Our delivery organization is focused on, they write up the bulk of our statements of work. They're involved early on in making sure that they understand the needs of the customer, so we don't run into that problem. So I think that's where the solution comes in, is the people who are going to have to do the work need to sign up for the work that they're going to have to do. There has to be something in there where they're checking that box. It's not just something, hey, here's what I sold, now now make it happen, because I don't want to sell something that's impossible. But it's easy to go down that path sometimes. So that's how we've handled it, is really just making sure that early on they're engaged from our previous discussion, but then they understand those requirements. So when they write up that statement of work, it's matching what the customer's needs are. And therefore we've priced it properly. Doesn't mean it always comes out exactly right, but we've priced it properly. We have confidence in our ability to deliver. Now it's a matter of, once that's signed, going out and doing it. And I will tell you that even in the handoff to delivery in those organizations, I still stay tightly connected with the customer, because I have found that typically if there is a problem and there's an escalation, they're probably reaching out to me first, because I'm the person who helped build that relationship to begin with. And I want to be ahead of it. I am just like any other leader. I don't like to get blindsided, right? So I want to be engaged. I want to when there's a potential problem, so that we can work on what a solution is going to look like, how we're going to fix it, as opposed to it gets to the point where it's faced multiple customer escalations, and now you're looking at a retention issue.
Mike, you want to jump in on this? Thank you, Chris.
So first off, Liz, you said some nice stuff about all of us. You didn't say anything nice about you. You are the sales strategist. If we're talking about funnels and conversions and workflow and taking all of the chaos and creating clarity, there's nobody else better to go to than you. So thank you for pulling all of us together and saying what you said about each of us. One of the challenges that ends up happening as you go through this, and we'll take your funnel. So there's people that go into the funnel, and then they work their way through the funnel, and then at the end they come out as whatever it is that they come out. Some people disappear, some people make it all the way through, and then that funnel gets flipped over again, and those people that come out and they start to get bigger and bigger and bigger based on the opportunities that are in front of us. And there's a lot of conversions that happen on that side. And what happens, what I see happen often inside organizations, is they describe each of the components that are happening throughout that process in the same way that 5 blind people would describe an elephant. And they hold on to the floppy ears or the trunk or the leg or the body, and we've all got a different perspective of what those things are. And too often it happens because we work in those silos and we have our own language that we like to use around each of those things, whether it's customer or buyer or influencer or end user or implementation or launch or whatever the language is. And we don't have a common vocabulary that we've created inside our business. And more than just the common vocabulary that we don't have a common set of systems and processes. And what ends up being even worse than the lack of common vocabulary and lack of systems and process is sometimes people will use the same word and be talking about 3 different things. We'll talk about buyers and we'll talk about customers, and we might be describing different versions of what they're doing at any point in time. So there's this lack of alignment that takes place because we're so focused on doing the job that we need to do, which is really important. And then we're not leading the groups and bringing those groups together to answer this question. Are we aligned? Are we aligned? And one of the fastest ways to figure out whether or not you're aligned is to ask these follow-up questions. Why do our customers buy from us? Why do they continue to buy from us? Why do they leave? I'll even give you 2 other ones that you can ask to really make it super simple for both internal and external customers. How do our customers make money? How do they lose money? If we know those answers, just basic things, then we can start to figure out, okay, well, where does that fit in that funnel? Either the funnel as it starts to shrink or the funnel as it starts to expand. What's our role in there, and how can we enable and empower our customers to do better in each of those areas? Because ultimately, it's very rare that I come across people who come to work and don't want to feel like they're making some kind of impact on somebody or something. It's rare. It's rare that people don't want to feel appreciated. They don't want to feel valued. It's rare. It's rare that somebody comes in and says, I'm going to do whatever I can to make this as hard on the next person as possible. It's rare, but it happens in some instances. And a lot of times the reason it happens is because of a failure of leadership. At least from my perspective, it's a failure of leadership.
So I want to reiterate, one of the most important things is this shared vocabulary. And it's one of the things that I get poo-pooed on a lot. Like, my client's initial reaction is often, well, it doesn't really matter. Like, we all know what we're talking about. And then you get to the point where you realize everybody didn't know what everybody was talking about. The projections are wrong because we weren't using the same language. We weren't using the same criteria, the same set of rules. I had a funnel review this morning where we moved probably 12 deals back further in the funnel because we weren't using the same language. We weren't using the same set of rules. I get to be the person who gets to walk in the room when the sales team is saying, I sold this. It's not my fault they didn't deliver it. And marketing said, marketing says, well, I showed them what we do. I don't know why there was confusion. And customer success is going, why am I the one everybody's always yelling at? And operations is going, well, if sales had sold it right. I mean, this is not a conversation I've been in once or twice or 15 times. I'm in this conversation often. And I think that we've heard a lot about how do you deal with this? You deal with this by making sure that the team uses the right language, that you have clear criteria, that before you start doing a proposal, everybody knows what information is required and there's no skipping steps because the customer is in a rush. When my brother used to have a home automation company that I worked with for many years, and the buyers in the beginning of the journey, these very, very wealthy people would say, I don't want to sit down with you step by step and go through which light switch is going to do which thing. I am too busy. I do not have time for that. And what I will tell you is that every single deal ended with the customer angry because the light switch didn't do the thing they wanted it to do. And they held out their 5% because they wouldn't have that meeting, right? It's important that we understand what we have to know to be successful, and everybody's on the same page about it so that we can support it. So if we don't want finger pointing, SOPs, language, criteria, setting each other up for success, that's what it takes. I'm going to wrap this up there. I'm not even going to ask this team if they have any more to say, because I think they already gave us their brilliance. So thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. Join us in our next episode, because in our next episode, we're going to talk about KPIs. It's going to be a quick conversation, but measures and KPIs matter because they incent behavior. So let's have a conversation about that next. Let me get us all out here. Welcome to the CEO Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, your host, and I'm here with your Sales SOS podcast crew. Chris Bowen, who is a sales leader, who's wrestling with these things every day. Renee Bigelow, who's a fractional CMO. Bryn Tillman, who is a LinkedIn and AI expert, a brilliant tactician. And Mike Simmons, who, I mean, we call him the whiteboard guy, but by golly, he is really a brilliant thinker who really knows how to break things down into models and make them make sense so that people can execute. And I'm your sales strategist. I help companies take the chaos out of sales. So let's dive in to KPIs. If we want our sales team, our marketing team, and our customer success team to work together, we need to create a conversation. We need to create an environment and a set of measures that will actually get the team working together. And sometimes I think, and Renee, I think you could probably talk about this better than anybody. I think that sometimes we create measures that actually get our teams fighting with each other rather than working together. So let's talk about, what do we do wrong about KPIs and how can we do it right?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about this earlier that Bryn pointed out that, a lot of people think salespeople are motivated by, money. Their structure is commissions, right? Like, it's very clear line of sight for most people how sales is very aligned with closing deals, because their incentives are completely aligned with that behavior, right? It gets harder when you don't have that single moment of truth for other teams. And it gets harder when you're trying to represent the company versus individuals, right? When you're trying to set behavior that benefits a company versus themselves. It's very clear when it benefits you personally, right? And it's fuzzier when it benefits the company, but it's something you need to do. And I think when that happens, one of the things I see a lot is dashboards often get set based on the data that is available to measure more than the goal that we're trying to achieve. And sometimes that involves starting new measurements so that we can get to the goal that we're trying to achieve. Sometimes we're going to have to set KPIs that are activity-based, even though we'd rather have a data-based one, right? A metric that we could follow, because we don't have the right metric. And I personally believe this leads to, in marketing in particular, a lot of attribution crack. Like, we're really looking for the number that proves that we've done something or whatever. And I'm going to point out my favorite one that I like to pick on, which is when you silo marketing teams into specialties, somebody's going to have the job of getting more traffic because that's their job. This is the piece they own. And I'm sorry, we do not need a world where we just need more traffic. 98% of traffic on websites doesn't convert anyway, right? Like, and I'm just talking about to get a name or click an event, right, on the website. So this isn't even a close. So that's a bad metric. But we said it because when we looked at the data that we had available to us, it looked like the leading indicator. We can't get this many more leads if we don't get this much more traffic.
So Renee, stop for a second, because this is real. You've talked about a couple of things here I want you to dig into. One is leading indicators. This is really important. What really is a leading indicator? And the other is vanity metrics, right? I love that word because they sound really good, but they don't mean anything. So dig in a little bit more to.
I'm going to throw a third one out there that I pick on a little bit more, even the vanity metrics, and that is borrowed metrics, because everybody else is doing it. And it doesn't really fit we go to these conferences or we read these articles, and this is what marketing teams are supposed to be doing right now. And I had a customer who had a database, $100 million company, but a database of only a few hundred people. And they were trying to A/B test emails that were going to 35 people, right? So it's a borrowed metric. And I think to your point, they're all kind of the same thing underlying, whether it's a vanity metric or a borrowed metric or a wrong metric for a leading indicator. It's a step that comes before the step, but does it really mean what you're assigning that meaning to that metric, right?
Yeah.
Jump in, Bryn.
Yeah, so I love this conversation, and I think simply put, from my perspective, is the KPIs all have to align, right? If you have KPIs for marketing that are siloed from KPIs from sales, that are siloed from KPIs from customer service, you're going to have a lot of the leakage, right? You're going to have all that drop off. And I think if we can look at the KPIs as a process all the way through, and that one KPI, a successful KPI, can lead, it could be branched off, but if we hit this KPI, it will lead to the next activity with a KPI, and then the next activity with a KPI, so that the journey of KPIs will get us to the goals that we as an organization are trying to achieve. And I think when they are siloed, which seems to be kind of the theme of where things are mostly broken, when they're siloed, the KPIs may, at the handoff, the inappropriate handoff that we've learned, right? You're almost starting over and you lose momentum. So in my mind, it's again breaking down those walls and making sure that each successful KPI leads to another activity somewhere in whoever owns that motion, and that KPI needs to lead to the next one. And again, they can be branched off. It doesn't have to be completely linear, but we can do if-then statements in these KPIs. But I think they need to lead all the way through the customer journey.
So I want to back up for a second. I want to talk about vanity metrics for a minute. And I'm going to say this. If you are converting leads from your website, I got a fan on here, guys. Just have to ignore my hair that's blowing all over the place. It's only 90 degrees. If you have a vanity metric, like if you say how many people go to the website, that may be completely irrelevant if the people who are going to the website are not the buyers that you want there. But I will also say, if you're counting on leads coming in inbound and no one comes to your website, you have a problem, right?
100%. The problem is you can game traffic.
Right.
Your point. Like if I've set the goal as traffic and it isn't tied to an outcome, then I can game it. I can name to you 100 ways I could drive. You could show me any website. I could list 100 ways in about an hour that they could drive more traffic. But will it convert into customers? That's a whole nother thing.
But I want to say we can do the same thing with the sales calls. An SDR can dial out all day long on a list that isn't useful, and it's no more valuable than if they don't call at all. But what I do know is if they don't make any calls, if there are no conversations, there is no conversion. There are no closed deals. So somehow in this, we have to find that right balance of what are we measuring and how are we measuring it? And Chris, it looks like you've got something on this.
No, follow the same thing that you were saying. I know that people like to say sales is a numbers game, and I don't. Yes and no, right? There's a numbers component to it. Bye, Brendan. There's a numbers component to it, but there's also a knowledge and ability to communicate and other pieces that go along with it. With no activity, you're not going to get anything, right? So there's a level of activity, and then there's a level of the rest of sales that you sort of have to bring into the equation in order to actually make this tougher. And I think did I freeze again?
You're not frozen, but your sound is not very good. So
Let me see about that one.
all right. I'm gonna stop you because we can't understand you. I'm gonna let Mike jump in on this for a second.
It might be a little bit more than a second, but it will be good. So I've got a whiteboard. I'm going to use it. So if our objective is to generate money, acquire customers for the first time, then what we need on the front end is some, form of demand that happens, demand that's generated. We acquire a customer, and then we move into this whole, let's expand and grow. So this is that retention and expansion. And each of those are going to be different things that are going to happen in the course of the business. And it's going to feel siloed, but it's not about people and roles. People and roles, you can have marketing cover the entire side of this because they can enable each of those functions all the way through from if you buy into the one-to-many language that I used a little bit earlier on one of the other discussions. But in each of these areas, there's a conversion that happens. And to the point that Chris was making and Liz that you made, if you're not making calls, if you're not engaging with customers, if you're not having some kind of interaction, then you're not going to get meetings. And so maybe one of the things that you have to track is some activity metrics over on this side. But on any of these things, your KPIs, you've got a leading indicator, you've got a lagging indicator, because it's something that's happened, and then you've got a converting indicator that happens in here, and that ends up being the handoff. The pipeline created is a leading indicator for money that's generated or revenue on this side. Revenue is a lagging indicator from pipeline that was created. So the terms start to change and are used differently at different points in time, depending on the perspective that you're looking at the data. And one of the challenges that we run into is if we look at a dashboard, a lot of times you think of the dashboard that you've got on your car, that dashboard many times is telling you what's happening right now, not what happened 5 minutes ago or 10 minutes ago or 10 days ago or what's going to happen at some point in the future. You start to make some inferences on it. So if you look at this from a car perspective, you've got leading, looking out toward the back, toward the front, lagging, looking out toward the back. And let's, as teams, as we interact with each other and we have conversations with each other, let's make sure we're calling the thing the right thing. This is in my experience and over time, and it's taken me a while to get here, when you find that teams have converting indicators, meaning that leading versus lagging happen in the handoff in between two, then you create a much better level of alignment across the business. And now they start working together on the same thing. And we're not talking about 800 other vanity metrics or some other thing that's out there. So look at your functional things that are happening. Is it a demand thing? Is it an acquisition thing? Is it a retention expansion thing? Is the number a leading number or a lagging number or a converting number? And how are we trending that data over time? And if you start to do that, then you'll create better alignment and be able to make better decisions as an organization around where do you need to invest more time, energy, and attention? And what do you need to stop because something's changed in the market? And sometimes the owner of the data doesn't want to stop because that's what they end up being compensated on. And that's where you get this misalignment that ends up happening inside organizations. So map it up on a whiteboard. And if you need some help, you know somebody.
I agree completely, and you just led into the piece I wanted to add, Mike, and that is one of the reasons that people use, and I'm going to speak from the marketing point of view, but this works for a lot of CRMs too, the data that's in their tools, because that's what that tool provider has elevated into a dashboard.
Yeah.
The reasons they use those is they have flipped the hard work of mapping their complete buyer journey to understand what all of the steps are, to really open up that perspective to the complete journey, not just that part that they were measuring in 60 to 90 days, right? But the complete journey, and look at all of those steps and figure out together which ones are those converting moments, right? Then you may or you may not have data around those converting moments. You may need to start building data around those converting moments, and you may need to figure out a way to structure that isn't readily available in some of the tools that you buy, right? And I think that's where these misaligned numbers often come from, like what's available on a dashboard. This is the data we have, and it's really just a data literacy problem at that point, right?
Yeah.
And not doing, and it's hard work to do these things. It's actually not that hard, but when you're trying to do your day-to-day job, this is another project. This is another deep think. This requires getting cross-functional people in a room and agreeing, right? That part is a little hard compared to let me check a box, right? So I find that one to be the converting metric is perfect, but the reason that a lot of people don't do it is they've skipped that step. They want to go straight into the dashboard that's all pretty that the tool provider provides.
It's like the whole thing around why are you looking for your keys over there? Well, because where the light is. Yeah. There's a lamppost and that whole thing. I mean, there's
Wait. Why are you looking for your keys over there? I'm looking for it over there because there's a light over there, not because that's the last place I saw my keys, right? Because there's light and I can see if they're there or not. And I think this ties really well into what Renee just said, which is, right, we measure what we can measure because that's the data we have. We don't measure what matters because that's not the data we have. So Mike, keep going. I just wanted
I was in one of the Slack channels that I'm a part of. Somebody said the typical thing that people will come up with, especially when the current thing isn't working. It's like, oh, somebody saw somebody talk on a podcast or on a show like this or in front of a group of people. And they were like, we got to go up market. Enterprise is where it's at. So they're getting ready to go from the SMB space to enterprise. And part of their justification, at least based on what they shared in a Slack message, was we want to go from 30K ACV to $30,000 in annual contract value versus, at least that's how I interpreted their ACV. It could have been average contract value, but anyway, let's say it's annual to 100K. And they wanted to know the benchmarks, and they wanted to know the best place to get the benchmarks. And I pushed back, because that's what I do. I asked a couple of questions. I said, what are you actually going to do with the information? If you're using an existing team, have that existing team start gathering data around what happens in the market when you reach out to other audiences rather than take somebody else's. If you're bringing in a new team, why are you going to grab numbers from somebody else's team when you're not necessarily building the same team? And the frustration of the person on the other side was basically, oh, well, I get all of that stuff. I just would like to have the benchmark data so we have something to compare against. And you're like, I evidently didn't communicate.
Like you can steal borrowed metrics.
They're
they're borrowed.
It's brutal, but it's really easy to do. And this is one of the negatives that has occurred with the amount with capital that is being put into organizations that's not tied to customers purchasing stuff. So when private equity injects capital into an organization, they've got their metrics that they want to use. When VC, venture capital, injects capital into an organization, they have numbers, but those aren't necessarily your numbers. So now, in addition to the conflict that you have inside your organization across this, you now have external things that are informing, and you're borrowing your KPIs from money and not customers, other teams and not your team. And that's the reason why I'm frustrated with
Two little things I'll add to that, because I think those are really, really important points. One is, I say this every time we get together every month, so here's my time to say it. What does the market support?
Right.
So your example of the capital injecting these numbers, they're often, this is just what we expect for what we've invested. It is not often tied to what will the market support. Again, hard work, right? To go out and figure out what demand metrics are out there. But there are a lot of them that aren't used. There's a lot stuck in your marketing department that is not used. You can use Search Console data. You can use market SEO data to understand what's out there, keyword research and things like that, to understand where the market is kind of pointing. There's a lot of little metrics that you could use for that, but it's harder work, right? Than just saying, okay, you said I have to do this, so I'm going to pass these metrics on down to my team. And the other one is outside of like, what will the market depend, is what capacity do we have, and can we reach it with the capacity we have?
Right.
The one, I mean, I'm going to speak up for some marketers in this one. I will often see, especially when I'm working with VC, if it's a startup, we're going to need 100x. Very clear. It's going to need to be 100x, and it's going to need to do that within 18 months, right? Okay, fine. They accept the math that you need to add a salesperson at each step along that 100x. They do not readily accept that one-to-many doesn't just magically happen with the same amount of marketers, right? So that's my one I like to pick on and speak up for the marketers, but the capacity for the organization has to also fit into those. And your converting metric at that point may be, when we hit this benchmark, we're going to add capacity. And that gets really fuzzy in a lot of these cascading metrics too.
Especially when you start bringing in new technology too, because your typical SaaS metrics aren't going to align with what you're seeing from AI first organizations or AI native organizations, and the cost of operating that business versus some of the other businesses. Yet everybody's coming with their same stuff because they did this at Zoom in 2020.
Well, let's take that even further. SaaS metrics don't work in complex business-to-business manufacturing sales. Like, the model doesn't work, the metrics don't work. It's a completely different animal. So I think this is so important, this conversation about what metrics matter to you. And if you can't figure it out, or you can't figure out how to find it, this is one of those places where AI can actually help. There are lots of places where AI creates more noise, but if you can't figure out how to get the tools you have to measure what you need to measure, then let's see if AI can take the data from your organization to figure it out. Where are conversions happening? If your CRM isn't measuring it properly, maybe there's something else in your organization that does measure it. Like, how often are you sending out proposals? How often are you sending out MSAs? How long does it take from the time the proposal is sent out until a deal closes? And if your CRM isn't measuring it, there may be a way to get AI to start measuring and figuring these things out for you. So the right measures for the right organization, the right market for your product, the right conversations with the right people to get the right result. This is what matters. And just because somebody else is doing it, because you can make more money at enterprise doesn't mean that your tool is good for enterprise, that your company's prepared to deal with enterprise, the sales cycle is longer, right? There's a whole bunch of costs that go into working with enterprise. Is that the best thing for you? I think that's the biggest thing. When we're setting our KPIs, we need to understand a couple of things. The first is, why are we measuring what we're measuring, which is Mike's favorite thing to say to us. Because we can measure it doesn't mean we should be. What is it we need to know? The second thing is, what are the indicators of momentum? How do we know if we are really moving deals along the buyer journey? Are the buyers sticking with us? Are they buying? What do we really need to measure to understand it? And the third thing is, are we failing or succeeding based on a really good strategy? Or are we just reacting to whatever comes our way and then trying to measure it? if you have a really good strategy and you understand the marketplace and you understand your tools and you understand the resources in your team, you can build a strategy and measure your momentum toward that strategy, toward that goal, as opposed to just reacting and measuring reaction, because measuring reaction isn't really helpful.
Liz, I'd like to add one point to your momentum builders, right? And that is, I'll give an example of two numbers I won't say I insist on with every client, but I push so hard. It's like I'm in their ear all the time until they do it, because it's a compounding negative until we have it. So if you find, as Mike pointed out, conversion inflection moments, right? And you don't have the data for that, the longer you go before you build the data, the more it compounds negatively for you, because somebody else is out there doing it, or your customers are finding a better way to a solution. It may not be a better solution, but a better way to a solution. And two that I insist on are NPS and eNPS, because NPS is going to be a
Net promoter score and
employee net promoter score. So like it's pretty proven as eNPS dips, your NPS will dip, right? So it can be leading and lagging put together, but also when you get that data, you can segment your audiences, right? Between not just people who close, but people who promote you, right? People who are super satisfied and happy, and you can re-engineer based on their journeys. And if you don't have that data, it's that same thing of like, this is proprietary data that we really need to have. And the longer you go without it, the more compounding that negative is. It's dragging on your momentum without you realizing it.
Okay, that is a great note to end on. Chris, do you have any last thoughts before we wrap up? You do.
One was
Chris, we still can't hear you.
Okay.
Let's see. Wait, try again. Maybe that. Okay, try again.
No.
You're frozen, my friend.
It is what.
Chris, type it in the chat and we'll get Liz.
Then we'll read it. Oh, he just popped out.
We're probably trying to reconnect.
Yeah, let's see if he reconnects. But I think we didn't dig into the answers as much as into the problems. But I think clearly, if you measure marketing on how many people go to the site and how many forms they filled out, and that's all you measure them on, and then you ask sales to be measured on how many deals they close, and you ask customer success to get measured on NPS, those are completely disconnected tools for measurement that don't bring your teams together. Okay, Chris, try it again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I had two things. One was on something that Mike had said when he was talking about the podcast or whatever he heard, where they wanted to move from 30,000 to 100,000 ACV. I'm like, do you understand what it's going to take to deliver that? Do you have the same value to that customer at that level? And do you understand what that's going to do from a CAC perspective? So if you don't understand all of those things, you may think you're chasing a bigger top line number, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be profitable for you, right? There's a whole lot of other factors that go into that mix. And I think it's a horrible flaw to just think, all this is it's the same thing we're doing now, but more complex. It's not. It's a different motion altogether. And so you need to be able to understand that. And I can't remember what the second point was because I got distracted, but it does not matter a whole lot. But I think it's really understanding if you're going to go chasing after a different market, if the only justification is just what that top line is, you're missing a whole lot of other factors that you have to consider.
Let's wrap it up on that note. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sales SOS, the CEO Sales SOS podcast. And we will look for you in our next episode. Everybody have a great day.